Hey everyone! Today's video is going to be about getting started in Adobe Illustrator when you have already used Photoshop and are used to the way it works. This video has been requested by one of you, maybe not exactly in the same form. You actually asked for tips and tricks for Illustrator, and I plan to do something that's more specific to that. But I thought a good way to start will be mirroring my own journey in digital art, which started in Photoshop, at first with editing photographs for fun, and later on with some drawing. Later I switched over to Illustrator. So I was very used to Photoshop and the way it worked. I did not have graphics tablet at this time. I was using only the mouse, and since I was limited to the mouse and what it could offer, I had to come up with some creative ways to do what I wanted to do. So the way I did this was by drawing a sketch with pencil on paper and scanning it, opening it in Photoshop and tracing that with the pen tool and so on. So when I switched to Illustrator, I tried to carry over the same workflow, but I discovered that this was actually quite difficult for me because a lot of the tools I was used to in Photoshop worked in a very different way, so I couldn't do that. And if you are in the same position where you've been using Photoshop but would like to expand and learn Illustrator as well, I will now show you a few of the things that you will probably notice when you first start, the differences that will probably be frustrating, or at least they have been for me. And at the time there was not as much resources as today, so I had to figure it out on my own, but hopefully you will have to do that because maybe this will help you. Also, a little disclaimer before we start: both my Photoshop and Illustrator are a bit old. They are CS6 version, as my laptop is very old as well and it can't support the current versions. I am planning to get a new one in September, so if I see any changes worth noting, I will update this video. The times when I've used a newer version, I don't remember it being so different in those ways. I hope this is still relevant, but if not, I'll just redo it in a month or two. So let's get started. I will start by opening a new document. Okay, and right away, first thing I notice, there is this ruler around in Photoshop, which does not automatically come out in Illustrator, but you can easily and quickly bring it out hitting Ctrl R. There it is, but that's not exactly what I want to talk about first. The first thing that you may notice is that your workspace doesn't really look that much different, but once you start working, you will feel it. First of all, you can't really move around in Photoshop, while in Illustrator you can go anywhere. You have this really huge board, really huge, around your digital sheet of paper, let's call it, and you can actually use this. So if I draw a shape like that, let's give it a color, it actually goes beyond the boundaries of your workspace. You can also do anything outside and it just stays there and it's fine, while in Photoshop you can't really do this. You can draw the shape outside, but you'll only see the inside part. You can't you can't use this space outside. You don't, whatever you do on it, you don't see it. You can bring it in. Oh well, you can't. Actually, with this shape, you can bring it in. But with the brush, no, it's just cut. In Illustrator, you have this space around for maybe drafts. You can use it to do whatever you like. You can plan things. And if you happen to like them, you can select them and bring them over to your workspace and work further with them, which is very handy. You can keep versions of what you're doing. For example, you did something but you want to make changes, you don't want to lose your initial design, you can just copy it outside, so you have the first version, and then you can change the new one. So it's very safe to go back if you want to. You can keep all the different stages, and I do this a lot. So all this space around is basically for your doodles, or it's like a sketchbook, and this is your official art, if you can say that. So yeah, for me this is one very big difference between Photoshop and Illustrator. In Illustrator, this space that you can use is called the artboard. You can access it with this tool, Artboard tool, or by hitting Shift O. When we select it, we can easily modify this if we decide that we need different dimensions, different shape. You can also go up here and change the proportions, change the size, however you like. Another very handy, great thing with Illustrator is that you can have multiple of those artboards next to each other. You can go here, grab a new one, and the second one can have different shape. It doesn't affect the first. You can have as many of those as you like. They can all look different. You can also freehand draw them, so to say, just drag them, and you can export each of those separate artboards as a separate artwork. So if you make something like icons, for example, or some kind of UI design, or well, anything really. I've also done presentations for school this way. You can have all the slides in those different artboards and export it as a PDF file, or you can save them as JPEGs. Anything, it's one file, but it contains many artworks within itself. In Photoshop, you can't do all of this. If they have implemented that, I have heard something along those lines, but the version I have cannot handle this. It's just one sheet of digital paper, and that's all. I think this is enough for the artboards. Let's move on. The second thing I want to talk about is how color is handled in both of those programs. Photoshop, we have this swatches panel where you can choose the color, save the color, so on. We have the same thing in Illustrator, so nothing that fancy. This one is actually usually on the right side, but for me it's more comfortable to have it on the left. So yeah, this is just me, I just moved it. You will probably find it on your right. But what is different and interesting is down here. In Photoshop, you have this thing called foreground color and the background color. You can switch between them. You can choose, modify each of them however you like, and whichever is on top will determine what color you're going to be drawing with. In Illustrator, again, you have two boxes with colors, but the first one is your fill color, and the second is your stroke color, which, yeah, you can modify whichever is on top. And when you draw a shape, it's going to have the fill color that you chose and a stroke with the other color that you chose. You can make the stroke thicker so you can see it. And if you want to have a shape which is only a fill, you can turn off the stroke color, this way no stroke, or the other way around. If you want to have a shape that has a stroke but doesn't have fill color, there it is. Using this little swap arrow, you can switch between the two. So yeah, now the fill is green. In Photoshop you don't have this concept of a stroke color. You can give things strokes, but you do it in another way, and to be honest, I don't quite remember how it was done. I think something like that, yeah, here. You usually could do it. Anyway, it's not so important. So yeah, the color is presented and handled a bit differently, and I guess can be confusing at first, but there's nothing really too tricky about it. The next thing that differs a lot between Photoshop and Illustrator is the layers. Both programs have layers, but I would say that in Photoshop using the layers is crucial, and you have to be very careful not paint, for example, on the same layer if you want to edit something later. You can also, of course, paint everything on one layer, but that makes it harder for you to later edit what you have drawn. In Photoshop, it's very important to constantly use a new layer and have all your shapes and things and colors separate from each other, so turn them off, you can delete it, you manipulate it however you like, and often you can end up with lots and lots of layers in this layer panel. In Illustrator you still have layers, but I would say they are way less important, because inside you have those paths, and the paths are kind of like the layers in Illustrator, but you don't have to worry about them, because anytime you do anything, they just create themselves. You don't have to do it manually. And all of them are within this layer. Each dot, each mark you make, it's its own path, and it's all separate. Well, they don't call it layer, but it basically is a layer. You can move them. So let's say this is right now the top layer, but you can move it back, so now it's behind the other line we drew. You can move it anywhere, so it's very easy to manipulate and change things risk-free. Most of the time when I use Illustrator, I don't use more than 2, maximum 3 layers, and on the first layer, let me show you, I would usually have my sketch. I will lock this layer and just trace over it, and then I will just hide it and even delete it. This whole image is created on just one layer, and each shape is its own, let's call it, under layer. So when using Illustrator, you can do quite a lot on just one layer, and it's really not something you should think about too much. There are some instances when those will be a little more important, but all in all, it's very easy to use just one. And if at any point you actually want to add another and move a group of objects, you can easily just move them to the next layer, and there, yeah, pretty easy, no big hassle. Okay, moving on to one of probably the most important tools, the pen tool, and it has always been very relevant to me, very important. Pen tool is for some reason working a bit differently between Photoshop and Illustrator, and when you're used to the one program, it can make it pretty hard to get used to the other. And even if you are not used to anything at all and you're just starting with Illustrator, it can be a bit hard to learn and get into it. So in Photoshop, if you just want to make something like a box or something with sharp edges, there is really not much of a difference. It's pretty easy, but you would rarely really do this. most of the time you will need to make something with a curvy line, and sometimes you will need a sharp angle within that curvy line. And getting this shape to look as you want it to look can be difficult. I would usually have something under to guide me, a sketch. The way it's done in Photoshop, when you want to do a curve, you place your anchor point and you drag, and you get those handles which can help you make a shape. Now if I want to manipulate this shape, I can't do it this way. Now if I want to manipulate this shape, I will have to go and get the convert point tool and drag this handle, for example, to make a sharp angle, to go back to the pen tool, continue. Okay, if this is wrong, again I have to fix it like that, and it's a bit of going back and forth. It's not as convenient. And then we close the path. The thing is, I don't even remember how this was working in Photoshop anymore. I never really use it in Illustrator. Let's say we're doing a shape, and now we want a curve. We place it, the anchor point, we drag, again the same way, and we get this curve. And then we can continue with the curve. But let's say now I want to do a sharp line. All I need to do is just tap here on the anchor point and continue wherever I like. So no going back and forth. This is convenient. And then if I want to go back and edit any of those points, then I would need the convert anchor tool, and I can then make curves or angles. And to make a curve, I just drag in the direction that I want the curve to go, and if I want a sharp angle, I have to take the handle and move it around until it goes where I want it to go. So this becomes intuitive after a while, but it takes some time to master. But it's one of, if not the most important tool in Illustrator, so it's very important to learn that, and I think I will make some kind of tutorial on it, because right now I can't really go too deep into it. There are subtle differences between the way it works in Photoshop and Illustrator, and it can be very frustrating to get used to the way this is handled across those programs. So for now I'll leave it at that. Oh yeah, also something great about the pen tool is that you can make a complicated drawing like this one without having a tablet at all. I do have a small tablet, but most of the time I'm just using the mouse because it's really all you need. Next tool that I want to discuss is the Eyedropper tool. The Eyedropper tool is used if, for example, you have this cover and you have this cover, and now you want to know what this cover in the middle is. If you want to blend those two, it can be helpful to know what the cover in the middle is. And the way you do it is by getting the Eyedropper tool, clicking in the middle, and then you have this in between cover. Now we can paint with it. Let's take covers that are a bit more far apart so you can actually see what's happening. Let's see, we have this one and this one. And the cover in the middle is this one. Now, if we want to do the same thing in Illustrator, we are actually not going to succeed. Let's say we have two shapes. They're both slightly transparent. So in between them, we have a new cover created. And if we want to know what this cover is, yeah, we can't. Because the Eyedropper Tool is going to pick up the cover of the shape that's on top. So that's not so handy. I wish there was a way to do that, because sometimes I want to know what this in-between cover is, and I have to figure it out by basically trying to guess. Maybe it's this one. Yeah, close enough. Okay, next thing I want to mention is cropping. In Photoshop, if we want to change the shape of this workspace, or we want to work with different dimensions, all of a sudden we have started with this one, but all of a sudden we get different information, we need something more of a square, let's say. Can use the cropping tool, and here we can specify the new dimensions, or we can just drag it around. You can choose different ratio. Let's say this is what we want now. Confirm it, and then this is our new image. In Illustrator, we don't have any crop tool, at least not in this sense. We use the artboard, and we can manipulate that in pretty much the same way. But while in Photoshop we pretty much lose what is outside of this cropping, in Illustrator it's still there if we want it. Another way of cropping that, for example, I used to use a lot in Photoshop was the cropping mask. And the way this works, let's say, okay, let's get rid of these. Let's say that we have a shape and we want to maybe shade this shape. It will be very hard to transcend the lines, so, but we don't have to. Yep, let's say this is nicely shaded. Now, if we want to get rid of this part that is sticking out, we can just go to this layer, and we need to have the main shape underneath, the one that is going to guide what we can see and what we can't. So we go to the top layer, which is this shading. We left or right click, and we go to create clipping mask, and it's clean, it's gone. So we have this nicely shaded and it has a clean edge. I liked using this thing a lot when I drew in Photoshop, and when I went to Illustrator it was quite frustrating for me that I couldn't do that. Well, first of all, shading doesn't quite, you can't quite do this thing in Illustrator the way you do it in Photoshop, because it's not a painting program, so you can't just use a brush over. But let's say we have these two shapes and we want to cut this part out, or to crop it out in the way the cropping mask works. There are actually a few ways of doing that. One way would be to select those two shapes and go to this tool, which is Shape Builder tool. You get it by clicking Shift and M, and you can just click on the side that you want to get rid of, deselect, select this part, and just delete it, and it's there. Or if you want to use it in some way, you can just drag it out and use it however you like, and this remains inside there. Another way of doing the same thing would be with the Pathfinder, which is a great tool. So many things you can do with it. Oops, that's not what I intended. You can use the divide. Now they're grouped, so we have to double click to get inside the group. And this is separate now, this is separate. Underneath there's another shape that is separate. So all of these are cropped, and they can be their own separate shapes, or they can stay together. It's you can do whatever suits your needs. Another way to do it, again with the Pathfinder, you can use trim, and this is doing the same thing. Now, something that I needed a lot was making, you know, making some kind of illustration. I don't know. Let's imagine this is something. And let's say we want all of this to be inside a circle, like we only want what the things that are within the circle to be visible. We want to crop out everything else. The way we can do this is by selecting all of these together, right click and make a clipping mask. And there you have it all nice and clean and trimmed. And the best thing is that when you double click and get inside it, you can still move those shapes around and edit as you like. They're not gone, they're just hidden. Then you can get out, and yeah, this is your artwork. I use this a lot, for example, in this illustration. Yeah, here for example you can see how I use the space around to just try some things or create some things that I later use in the illustration. And here I have 3 layers, one for the sketch, I actually need to delete that one for the background, and one for the foreground, which is the girl. And the way I made the background is I just drew this whole thing. See, these things extend beyond. And I drew a circle over it, used the clipping mask, and now everything is nice and clean and trimmed. This is quite nice. So it basically will give you the same or similar results to Photoshop, but you arrive there in a slightly different way. Okay, next difference that I wanna touch upon is the quality. And for me this is a big one, and one of the reasons why I stuck with Illustrator for so long, and I find it very hard to go back. So the deal with the quality is that Photoshop, you probably have heard that before, is a raster image program, and Illustrator is vector image program. With raster images, the image is created by pixels, which are tiny little squares that make up your whole image. And the more of them, the nicer the quality will be. You can't always see that on screen, but if you print out lower resolution picture, you will see that it's blurred and doesn't look so good. Or if you try to scale, for example, this image up or down, you'll see the quality change. Let's see. If we come closer, you can see how all the edges are blurred and it just doesn't look so good. If you create an image at the wrong resolution and you have to print it out or sometimes even just use it for web, it can be a bit of disaster. It can be hard to fix. So the difference with Illustrator is that here the images are not made of pixels. They're made by mathematical calculations of all these shapes, and no matter whether we scale it down or blow it up, if we get close, we'll see that all these edges are still just as sharp and the quality remains the same. Now, after you export the image as a JPEG, for example, it is going to be made out of pixels and you will have this same issue with the quality. But you can always go back to your source file and save it as the proper resolution. So to me, it's very safe working in Illustrator because no matter how tiny your details, they're actually nice and clean and sharp. This is one of my favorite things. Just look at it. It's just so perfect. Okay, and I already went quite long, so I'll give you one last point, which is exporting your images. In Photoshop, there's nothing tricky about it. Let's say this is your image. You export this image, whether through the export or save for web, and this is your image. That's it. In Illustrator, however, you can again, do it through export or save for web, and if you save for web, you're just going to get whatever is within those edges. That's straightforward. If you have multiple boards, artboards, like there is another one here, whichever one you click on and work within, that's what save for web is going to export. But if you go to export, let's say as a JPEG, you have some options down here. If you save it the way it is right now, it's going to export absolutely everything. Everything. All this, well, not all of this, but wherever you have made a dot, it's going to be exported, so it's probably gonna look something like this. Here, when it's empty space, you're not going to get that, but you'll get something like this. And that's not really what you want. Or sometimes it might be. To get what's within those artboards, you have to select Use Artboards. And then you can either export all of them, no matter how much they are, or you can say, I just want the first one. And this is going to give you just the image that's inside this window. It took me a while to discover this. It's embarrassing how long I didn't know how to get it. I would export the whole thing and then go into Photoshop and cut out what I actually wanted to use. But yeah, it's actually pretty simple. I think I will stop here because I have a feeling this is already insanely long. It's the first time for me trying to explain all those things, so I realized that it may not be very fluid and there might be many things you don't understand. So if that's the case, just ask me down in the comments. I would like to make more of this, especially if there is interest for them. Well, mostly if there is interest for them. Again, let me know in the comments if you want to know more about Illustrator, and I would love to share with you what I have found out through the years. I find that it's not as popular program as Photoshop, or a lot of people are afraid of it, and I used to be. It is tricky to get started with, but it's worth it. So let me know what you think, and I'm sorry if I was rambling too much or I didn't make my points clear. I'm very new to trying to share my knowledge, and I would like to get better at it, because when I was starting it would have been really helpful if there was more information out there, and I would have saved a lot of time if I didn't have to figure everything out on my own and could just watch a video or read an article or whatever. I also realized that this sort of video might not be as much fun to watch, so I think next week I will do something more lighthearted, because this sort of video also puts some more pressure on me. I really want to be clear and helpful, and I'm not sure I was that today. So I hope I will improve on that with your feedback. Let me know what you think and come back again next week for something more fun. I don't know yet what it's gonna be, but we'll find out together. And until then, have fun!